Hello, welcome everybody to this Thrive Tribe video. I'm delighted to welcome Freya Blom today, who joins us for this interview. Welcome, Freya.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Lovely to see you. Lovely Christmas tree, by the way, in the background. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Probably the first time I've said that this year. Now, Freya is a very experienced life coach, and I'm really delighted to have her here to talk to us today. We're going to talk, obviously, about thriving for the Thrive Tribe. We're going to try, Freya, between us to come up with some hints and tips for people on how to thrive more in life. And I know you have a particular specialist area of relationship coaching.
Yes.
So maybe we'll get on to relationships and what all of that entails. A very big area of most people's lives, actually. But before we start with that, let's maybe just start a little bit focusing in on thriving. And we were chatting before about my view on thriving, which is I'm trying to help people get to a more meaningful experience of life. That's really my mission, in whatever meaningful means to that person, because I think it's very unique to each individual.
Yes.
But to me, it's about making this experience of life, making this journey through life, if you want to think of it that way, more meaningful, more impactful, more just a better experience, really, that we enjoy more. Any thoughts from your side on what thriving means and from your experience of coaching people?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, meaning is obviously the key because it's how we interpret things and experience them. But I think the thing about thriving is actually to be able to feel in the first place. And my experience working with people is a lot of the time, especially if they're coming with relationship things, is that there's a level of disconnection happening a lot of the time for various reasons. And so for me, thriving is actually how my motto, in fact, is how can I live a fully expressed life? And what that basically means is how can I be as alive as possible at all times? That's thriving to me, is actually being alive. And I don't know if people can relate. Certainly for me, you know, if I think of really extreme examples like, you know, death of a loved one, for example, you know, those times that are incredibly hard and challenging are also times when we become very conscious of our own mortality and of being really alive. And I remember, you know, losing my father, actually being able to feel the life course through my body, through my veins, and realizing, you know, without life in me, what am I? I'm just a piece of flesh, essentially. So for me, thriving is about recognizing that we're alive as often as possible, and allowing ourselves to feel and express as often as possible. Because, you know, I don't want to kind of be obvious about it, but I think often we focus on thriving as in, you know, how can I get this thing that I'm already good at to this perfect level of talent and and that's really important. That's brilliant. If you can make that kind of little shift and difference and it explodes things to a new level, that's brilliant. But I think actually a lot of the time, the first step for lots of the people that I've met over the years is actually, first of all, to really reconnect with life and then tweak the hell out of it to get it to be what you want it to be, you know? So I'm sure, you know, you're working with a community who want to thrive. So I'm sure they're already in that zone. But for me, thriving actually means connecting into, plugging into being alive as much as possible, and then doing whatever you can with that.
That's really nice. I love this expression that you used, a fully expressed life. I was talking to somebody yesterday about, you know, being who we really are. We were having a conversation about how we construct the sort of ego version of ourselves, a sort of story about who we are. And then we live that out and we try to be that without ever realizing we're doing any of this. It just seems normal. And the difference between that creation we've made of who we are and who we really are. You know? And it seems to me that what you're saying there about a fully expressed life would really, you know, go into who I really am and bring more of that out. You could, after all, it seems to me, you could be a very successful on the surface person doing something exceedingly well and be completely unhappy and not find any meaning or purpose in it at all. In fact, I know that's the case. We hear stories about people in what we would consider to be extremely envious situations, for example, who turn out to be completely miserable because they're not being themselves. So there's more to it than meets the eye, isn't there? And I think the great battle nowadays, it seems to me, is the social pressure and the media pressure to be something in particular, to achieve certain things, whether it be education, getting a degree, you know, getting a career, whatever it might be. And there's a lot of disappointment out there at the moment. you know, in terms of people
mm,
at a university and not finding the dream job, or not having that level of material
mm,
success that they were promised, or
mm.
feel pressured to achieve. And I think what both of you and I are believing and trying to share with people here is that that's actually not necessarily the route to happiness and a meaningful experience of life.
Completely, yeah. I mean, I'm really lucky. I've trained with some amazing people. The person who taught me hypnotherapy over a very intensive period of time, his repeated phrase was, "You mark your own scorecard." And what that basically means is actually it. You know, we base so much on external assessment, but really you mark your own scorecard. What's confidence? Confidence is looking at your scorecard and going, actually, I did my best to get that thing done, and I'm being my best self, and I'm marking my own scorecard. And so it doesn't matter what anyone else says about me. How I feel is congruent with who I am. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, authenticity is probably my highest value of anything, really. And my understanding from working with people and with my own career, I'm ex-corporate, so I was in corporate for many years, is that, you know, we can be incredibly effective in lots of different ways. We can do really, from the outside, really amazing things. But actually how we feel is everything. So if I'm doing something amazing to this external world, but inside I don't feel good, am I really living? Am I really successful? You know, I measure success on my level of ownership and aliveness and responsibility that I take. You know, that's how I kind of assess it. And my relationships are, because they're a mirror, relationships are a mirror. My romantic and otherwise, my relationships are very important to me. They're a way of me understanding how I'm operating in the world and how successful that is and that kind of thing. But they're not the defining moment for me. So you mark your own scorecard, you're on your deathbed, you're the only one who's in your head thinking, how have I felt? What have I done? That's the true measure for me.
Now, you were saying something really interesting to me before the call about your definition of relationship, which really blew the subject open a little bit for me, because I, maybe like many people, would instinctively react to that word relationships, thinking one-to-one partner type of relationship.
Yeah.
But actually, there are many different types of relationships, I think, that we live in and have to operate successfully.
Yes.
Would you like to share that definition you had of relationships and how you
think
about that?
Yeah. Well, actually, it's the dictionary definition, which is a relationship is literally a movement towards or away from something or someone. So actually, relationships are about movement. And we tend to think about romantic relationships because in our kind of egocentric world, it's this romantic, there's lots of stories as well, by the way, from society that kind of force us down that route, you know, the Disney romance and stuff like that. And other relationships that are obvious, I guess, are family and colleagues. But when I think of relationships, I'm actually always thinking about relationships in what I'm doing. You know, am I moving towards this thing or away from it? Is there a push? Is there a pull? What's my relationship like with this part of my body? What's this relationship like with this other person? What's this relationship like with the work that I'm doing? What's my relationship with the environment? You know, a relationship is literally around a movement. And I think we're quite narrow in how we view relationships and how things show up. And actually, if you can tune into how you're moving towards or away from something, you can get a lot of information about what's inspiring you, about what's motivating you, what gives you energy, what drains you. I mean, it's really fascinating. And also you can find out where you're bumping up against fears or limiting beliefs or, you know, things that are making you move away from it, when actually if you worked on that and you could move towards it, that would be an amazing thing to move towards. It would give you so much. So relationships for me are literally everywhere. Yeah, they're where your priorities show up.
One of the things I really love about the way you're describing this is you know, it's obvious when you stop and think about it that everything is constantly changing.
Yes.
The sort of weird idea that everything is stable and nothing will change. Few unsafe, that's it. Everything's sorted. But everything, including our own bodies and the world and the universe, everything's constantly moving and changing all of the time. In fact, we're not even solid objects, we're made of atoms, you know, if you get
I was going to say, we're not even.
So let's accept that everything is fluid and moving and changing.
Yes.
And what I love about the way you're describing this is when you start to think about, am I moving away from or towards something, it incorporates that sense of fluidity and dynamism in life. And then you start to think about, perhaps, the thought that went through my mind actually was how many things we're afraid of in life, and therefore we feel like we should move away from them.
Yeah.
And it really raised the question of, should I be moving towards this or away from it? And if we reversed how we're feeling about something, well, that could really unlock some things, you know? I'm thinking about some of the things that we are intuitively or naturally fearful of.
Yeah.
Which actually are most of the rewarding and meaningful things in life when you come right down to it, because they all seem a little bit risky and a little bit out there.
Absolutely.
And what I've noticed from your description there is that when I'm moving towards something that's a little bit stretching, a little bit scary, wonderful things happen.
Yes.
So that's a really useful notion, I think. Am I moving away from it or towards it? And where should I be moving to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and also just understanding, actually, this thing doesn't move me at all, any direction, and therefore that's a dead area for me, and that's okay. I don't have to be into that thing, you know. So I think it's great that you've got that sense of movement. That's exactly what I'm saying when I'm saying movements, because I believe the same as you. You know, we know, in fact, scientifically, that we're just particles vibrating, right? We're not as solid as we think we are, but we've got this you know, if you think about feel the fear and do it anyway, it's that concept of, you know, I'm moving away from this thing, but if I just make myself move towards it anyway, then the unknown is going to become known, and therefore I'm going to be able to progress. I mean, to me, it's like, we talk about comfort zones a lot, but I like to think of it in terms of blindness zones, if you like. You know, what we're usually running away from is a perceived experience. We actually have a lack of experience. If we push ourselves towards that thing and have the experience, it's no longer a fearful experience. Maybe we didn't enjoy it, maybe we did, but we have information about it, and we can make bigger, bolder, and actually more thoughtful decisions on the next step. You know, but we tend to run from our own imagination, which is hilarious, because we also run towards our own imagination. I mean, we create this dream life. We talk about goals and purpose. Yes. But you know, and that's a dream too. So like, it's all about what we're dreaming. It's all about what we're imagining we can do. You know,
that's a great definition of fear as well, I think, is avoiding an experience you haven't had yet.
Yeah. Yeah, avoiding unknown avoidance.
In case it turns out to be disappointing.
Yeah. Well, or in case it turns out to be great. You know, some people, especially if you're a repressed person and you've got like an artist inside you, and you've spent all of your life doing a day job that has nothing to do with that. I've worked with a lot of creative people. It's kind of one of my like main bodies of clients, and you know, people who've had their artist locked away for that long. Yeah. There is a huge fear if they step into that and they realize the scope of the passion for that thing, that they will actually tumble into regret and sadness because of wasting all this time not doing what they want to be doing. So people are avoiding what? They're avoiding disappointment that the thing isn't as good as they thought it was. They're avoiding sadness at realizing they could have had this thing all along, which is the thing I'm really passionate about. You know, I don't want anyone to go, oh, you know, I want them to understand that you can still do it now, you know. So and they're possibly avoiding things being great because, well, there's fear of success. You know, if I want this thing, if I step into it and I become really successful at this, will the people around me still love me? Will they think I've, you know, become big-headed, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's a billion reasons for that avoidance, but that's what it is. It's avoiding the unknown.
Maybe that's why the lottery is so popular, because you don't actually have to take any risks.
Take it out of your hands. Yeah, absolutely.
Material success is handed to you without any effort, any experience. Mind you, lots of people have bad experiences after they've won the lottery, so not necessarily the answer. That's really fascinating. So let's talk a little bit more about relationships then, in that sense that you were talking about, moving away from and towards. And you know, there are a number of different areas. Well, I mean, from what you just said, hundreds of areas. But I was thinking about, you know, there's obviously the romantic side of it, but then there's relationships with family, which I think are very influential, don't you, on people's thinking and beliefs and expectations. A lot of social pressure from the family, often. and friends, peer groups. Social media has a big role today, I think, for those who spend a lot of time on it, in terms of influencing and pressuring people into doing or not doing certain things. Work colleagues, the wider society, and then the relationship with ourselves as well. I mean, maybe that's a good place to start and then expand out. How do you think about one's relationship to oneself?
Well, that is the core. That's the nub of it, essentially. I mean, it's a huge subject, because it's where everything else comes from, really. But I think our relationship with ourselves is really interesting, because actually often we aren't having a great relationship with ourselves, because we don't know which bits of us are us and which bits are other people or other things. So, there are different levels of self in my kind of how I see it. There's the core essence of you that came into being when you were first conceived, actually, never mind born, that spark of life that is uniquely us. There's the us that is a human being, just like anybody else. So while we are completely unique, we're also the same as, in terms of our needs as a human being, that kind of thing. And there's the us that is imprinted on us through our family, and that can come through genetic history, like epigenetics, that can be handed through generations. That comes from our family's network of beliefs and experiences, so we get imprinted with a version of us from them. We get the us that we're supposed to be according to society's norms. And so who we are is actually a massive question. And there's a particular process that I do with people to work out their kind of core process, or their core purpose, if you like. And that focuses on, who am I, and what am I doing when I feel and I'm operating at my very, very best. So that, I can experience somebody's essence. I can sit in a room with somebody and feel them and experience them, if you like. But beyond that, that's the closest I've come to helping somebody pin down the essence of their being, is this particular process I do. But I think that who we are is the real question, because at any given moment, when we think we are who we are, what's happening is there's a voice here saying, well, you shouldn't do it that way, and that's one of our parents. And there's a voice here saying, oh, but the way that you look means this can't happen, and that's society. We've got all these different voices. So a lot of the work that I do with people on their relationship with themselves is actually helping them untangle what is inherited from someone else and what's really theirs. And that's all based on feeling. There's a knowingness that we can have in life versus a belief. A belief comes from somewhere else, and knowingness is internal. And tuning into how you're feeling and what you really know versus what someone has told you so many times that you think you know that, or that's a rule, is a different thing. So I don't know if I've answered your question. I've probably
no, it's absolutely fascinating. I think it's really getting to the root of what these Thrive Tribe discussions are about, really. Trying to help steer people towards more meaning coming from being more of who you really are. And the hardest question, I believe, for people is, but who am I? What is that? What is it for me? In a world where people are bombarded with images and explanations of who they should be. There's a lot of expectation out there. So people are forming these ideas, I think, of who they should be, how successful they should be, how beautiful they should be, they should be, all of these things, which are external messages, and ignoring themselves.
Completely.
So I think, but let me just check. I think what you just said was knowing your purpose or who you really are is about feeling it. Is that right? Rather than using the rational brain, for example.
Yeah, I mean, there are shades within that. So I think there is a knowingness that people get. So say, for example, we have it about our values. I've had very long-term relationships, very stable, loving relationships. I've been treated exceptionally well, I think, and I've treated, and it's a big deal for me. I specialize in relationships. I believe in them, and in giving the best of them to myself and to other people. So there's a knowingness in me that says, I know my limit of what I would handle from somebody. I
Yes.
know my limit. I know it inside me.
Mm.
And that's different to a belief.
Mm.
You know, that's a knowingness. So there's a certainty. There are certain things
Mm.
that I have complete certainty about, and I just do. And I couldn't tell you why. I couldn't necessarily unpick. It's like when you fall in love with somebody and you don't know why. I love this person. Why? Well, they've got all these great qualities and da-da-da, but really the key thing,
Yeah.
you can't really describe why.
That's sort of post-rationalizing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's actually a feeling.
Reason.
Yeah, completely. So we have certainty about various things. I mean, it could even just be, you know, I like orange. And I say, do you really? You know, let's check. I don't do this, by the way, but I could say, let's check, you know, do you like orange because your mum told you that that was her favorite color? You could unpick why.
Yeah.
No, I just like it. There's just this certainty. And we have that about a few things. And what I think we do is we then think that our beliefs are the same, which they aren't. They are, you know, wibbly wobbly, and they come from various different places. And we get confused about what's really our certainty and what somebody else has told us so many times that it seems to be a rule, you know. And so I think in terms of identity, it's really interesting. We've got the things that we know for a fact. We've got the beliefs that have been cultivated over time. And what we also have are choices and options and decisions. Because it would be easy for me to say, well, this thing I know about myself, this thing comes from my family. What I can do is I can decide if I want to accept or reject that thing.
Yeah.
Just because it's not mine doesn't mean I can't decide to take it on as mine if I want. So it's a creative process actually in identity, I think, which is what's fixed and what's fluid and what would I like.
And always, I think a lot of these coaching questions become about self-awareness, you know, of even recognizing these questions that we're discussing today, because, you know, in normal life, for people out there walking in the high street, this is just fact and the way things are rather.
Yeah.
You know, people don't recognize that they're having beliefs and feelings and all these different things trying to unravel. So self-awareness, I think, is a really good beginning, you know, to look into things. And then I think you're really onto something with this knowingness point. Because when I think about some of the big decisions I've made in my life, you know, it usually expresses itself as I just know in my bones is what comes out of my mouth. You know, there's nothing rational about this. In fact, lots of the things I do, I think many people, including maybe my family, would consider to be irrational things and not very logical. I just know them to be right for me, you know, and I think if you have that kind of level of confidence or certainty in what you're doing, then it's very easy. For other people, it looks really challenging, difficult, worrying, causes anxiety or whatever. But that's through someone else's lens, you know. So how do people get to this level of knowing? Do you think? What are the practices that get them there? Because what I'm thinking is, particularly with a relationship between two people, for example, we then have two sets of these things coming together. Trying to coexist and operate. So it's becoming quite complex now, isn't it? And one impacting the other and interacting between the two. Are there particular practices that you recommend, for example, to couples to coach together or talk together? How do you go about this whole thing? It's quite complex, isn't it?
Yeah, it is complex.
How do we get a successful relationship, Freya? That's what we all want to know.
You're right. It is very complex. I think about the tree. I think about trees, right? So I think about a lot of people come and the things they're complaining about are probably the leaves or possibly the twigs or some of the branches. Yeah. And often it's a case of getting to the trunk or the roots of the thing, right? And actually, two people in relationships, what people think is we're in a relationship. I'm putting in my 50%, they should put in their 50%, then we are at 100% in our relationship. But actually, we're two lots of 100%. We're two people, each of us has 100% in us, and we can give a percentage to a relationship or whatever. And how we are is going to impact how the relationship is and vice versa. So if things are wobbly, it's usually because somebody in that is wobbly. Because if you've got two people who have just grown apart, but they aren't wobbling inside themselves, they're actually just growing apart, they're just growing inside themselves, and that's not in the same direction. People can separate with a lot of love and grace, and it's painful, but it's completely doable and it's mature, you know? You can have a mature kind of level of separation because those two people have grown, they've explored, they've grown themselves, and they've come to a point where they're not working as a team anymore. Their interests are so different, and their aims for life and their values are so different that they're not a great team anymore, because they're pulling like horses in different directions. At which point they say, you know, we can lovingly kind of separate at this point, and that's fine. It's where you have a situation where people are placing their own fulfillment, the responsibility for their own fulfillment onto their partner. That's where the wobble comes. Because if I'm steady in myself, then whatever happens in my relationship is much easier to weather. If I'm not steady in myself, then the relationship becomes a place to lay blame, or a place for the pain to show up. And I start apportioning everything outside of myself, when really it's a wobble inside. So the question for couples and how to have a successful relationship is actually working on yourself, is self-awareness, is growing your level of self-awareness and your understanding of human beings, and relationships and interactions, and knowing what you want. Because we're told what to want, which is, you know, someone who doesn't cheat, and someone who, you know, takes care of you and does this and that. We're told what we want, but we're given brush strokes, and we're filling in the gaps all of the time. So some of the brush strokes are completely whack, in my opinion. And then we're filling in gaps with what? Well, we're scrabbling around. Or what does the TV say? What does my mum say? You know, what did they say at school? What do I quite like? You know, we're stitching together this idea of what we want in a relationship. And the better we know ourselves, the clearer we are on what we want, and therefore how we'd like to be interacted with and what lights us up, the better we can pick somebody. So the picking is an important part. The recognition of my own self being steady and responsible is a massively important part. And when you aside from those two things, the key really is actually connection. So I could spend, you know, I've worked with couples who've been together for years on end, and they don't look each other in the eye on a daily basis. I mean, if they do, it's for a second. You can go through a whole day, especially if you've got children and jobs, and go through a whole day without actually looking your partner in the eye. Now, this partner, this is somebody you've chosen. In theory, you've chosen this person because you think they're great. They're interesting. You really respect their opinion. You like the way their mind works. You love them at another level as well. You've got romantic feeling or whatever, but you've chosen this person because of the quality of the person. And then you're not even looking them in the eye. So why would we? It's like, why would you get something so incredible only to ignore it? It doesn't make sense. Your relationship is a vast resource. But if you never actually turn the tap on, it's nothing. And then you start blaming it. There's nothing coming from this thing. When did you turn the tap on? When did you look them in the eye? When did you sit down for 5 minutes even and look each other in the eye and see each other as humans, not as the worker bee, not as the parent? This is the person I connected with, and they're still in there. And that is the key, that connection.
That's great, because that kind of brings us a little bit full circle to where we started about the inner self, doesn't it? You know, that there are two of those coexisting. And I think what you're saying is there's a danger, I recognize this, there's a danger that we just see the ego in the room rather than the real person. And connecting and looking in the eyes that you were talking about to the root, doesn't it? To the real person.
It's the essence, absolutely. So the best way to have a successful relationship is to have time to connect with yourself in that way, and time to connect with the other person. And when I say have time to connect, I mean, there's an exercise I do with couples where all you need is 2 minutes. I mean, you can set it on your phone, a 2-minute timer. Any couple that tells me I don't have 2 minutes a day to do this, I'm like, well, really, where is the commitment to this process? 2 minutes? You are kidding me. You're not living if you can't spend 2 minutes, you know? You can't find 2 minutes. What is happening in your life? So it's putting time aside to connect with yourself, to explore yourself. That can be coaching, it can be personal development courses, whatever, but it can also be mindfulness, it can be yoga, whatever's your thing that you like. Connecting with yourself means I know who I am and I can feel who I am. And that means that if that person looks me in the eye, they'll find me. If I can't find myself, they're not going to find me. So first I find myself, and my partner does the same thing, and then we find each other because we're both actually able to be present. And we get to know that about each other in our relationship, and we support each other to come back. So I say to my partner, you're in your head, aren't you? you're in your head, come back to me. And we find ways of calling each other back out of the head, into the body, into the moment, into the self. And then we have this lovely magical connection. And it can be just an instant, but it is like a universe. It's a universe happening. It's gorgeous.
I can't think of a better way to end. I think we should all go out right now and remind people that they're in their heads and to come back to us. I think it's a perfect tip for the first thing we can try to do. Thank you, Freya. I'm going to call a halt there. Thank you so much. It's a fascinating conversation. And I know that we could have gone on for hours because I feel like we just scratched the surface, but maybe we could do another one sometime and go a bit deeper.
Lovely.
Thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.